And ladies and gentlemen, we are live. It is Monday, August 29th, the great year of 2022. And we can officially say whatever we want about COVID because the CDC and the FCC are no longer in cahoots. So we can say it was a bunch of bullshit. And here we, no, I'm just kidding. It wasn't a bunch of bullshit. It was serious. But that's just the nature of the beast. This is the Voice of Reason podcast.
Or it was the virus of China.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
China, the China virus.
This is the Voice of Reason podcast. Unreasonable voice, maybe today, but that's all right. As always, I'm joined alongside my two co-hosts, Mr. Andy Van Bever and Travis Kirkendall. And today we have a very special returning guest, the one and only Kasey Davis. Gentlemen, Kasey, how are we doing today?
Great.
Fantastic. It's good to have Kasey back again with us. We enjoy having her on. We're glad that we don't have to, we wish we had, maybe if we had Trey come on and then Trey would be like, no, V, that was Sean. That was Hank. That wasn't me. That was Sean.
That was a spot on impersonation too.
Well, we always, if we wanted to make the trifecta complete, then we'd invite Hank. We haven't had Hank on. I don't think we've had Hank on at all this season. Have we, Travis?
I think we had him on earlier in the year. For like a money episode, but I would love to have him back on again. He loves coming on, so
we love having Hank on. Tomorrow night is the as Sean has aptly named it, we call it our Pimple Cheeks League fantasy football draft tomorrow. And that is so. And that at that time we will have, just to give you this lineup, Travis, we will have in the same room at the same time Matt Firkus, Hank Owens, Matt Williams, Sean Phillips. It's just going to be this poop joke, doing your mom, just cornucopia of. We're going to all revert back to our childhood and make all these great, whatever.
Your mom sat on a cornucopia.
Uncensored. It's going to be awesome.
Thank you, Sean, for referring to my mother, who's been dead now for 12 years. I appreciate that. Thank you. Oh, my God.
You are welcome. I thought you might have forgotten. So I just
no.
If you remember.
just I'll share this about Sean because when he was a student of mine, we would always make jokes. And he would make jokes about doing my dead mother and just, your mom is just, you do your mom. I'm all into necrophilia. So, yeah.
No, I can say, I do have to say, one of the funniest things ever. I will never forget this. So the relationship that V and I had, one of the funniest things ever was, I think it had to have been my senior year. I took a class where there was like a bunch of freshman and sophomore. I purposely skipped it.
You did.
It was American history, so I could take one of the easiest class he had to offer my senior year.
Yep.
This was a couple of years after V's mom passed away, and we were just going back and forth. We were having a day. We were going back and forth, and it was funny because V said something. It was along the lines. He was joking around like, "Oh yeah, Sean, I saw your mom the other day." And I was like, "Oh yeah, where's that?" And he was like, "In Jugs magazine." And the class was like, "Ooh." Oh. So then it was funny because then I was like, "Oh, you know what, V? I actually saw your mom recently." And he's like, "Oh yeah, where's that?" I was like, "Yeah, well, it was actually in a newspaper in the obituary section."
And everybody's like,
class, they were like. Like shocked, and V just tilted his head, and he started dying.
And the whole class was like, the whole class was like,
they're like, "How does he get away with this?"
Oh my God!
Yeah, it's one of my better comebacks.
Oh my gosh!
Comebacks
and then
ever. Yeah.
Hank's little brother was in there. We just had. Oh, Coleman's on. He said COVID sucks. I hope Colby didn't have COVID. He probably just saying that COVID sucks. Period. But that class was unique in and of itself, and there would be many stories that we could come up with, but that's for another time. But how was your guys' weekend?
Pretty relaxed.
Our weekend was kind of chaotic. We were doing some stuff for the house, and we had training for Lupo and just a lot of stuff. But it was good. We got a lot of stuff done. We were very productive. We were too productive.
Yeah,
it was a good weekend.
Yeah. Sean, are you in production mode, or what's your latest project look like?
No, well, yes. We've got a couple events coming up. Second weekend of September, Social Gloves boxing event at Bank of California Stadium where the Galaxy play. Big YouTuber boxing event. Austin McBroom versus Gabe or something. The match I'm excited for is Le'Veon Bell versus Adrian Peterson.
Oh, so that's the makeup from the one that you had.
That's the makeup. Yep.
Okay.
And then on the 13th, taping in Irvine for United Wrestling Network. So gonna be a busy day. Taping about 3 episodes of television. Pretty stacked card. Gonna be a lot of fun. So
that'd be great.
Just busy. Just busy getting everything ready for that. We have some commercials and stuff that I think we got to go over and edit. But other than that, yeah, just busy.
Cool. Yeah, I was sharing with Kasey and Travis earlier. I ran out of my sleeping medication this weekend, and I was hoping I could make it through the weekend. We did good up until last night, and then last night, yeah, it was I went to bed like at 9:30, and I didn't get to sleep till maybe 2, and then I had to take my kid to practice this morning for cross country, and I got back home, and I was just like, I'm checking out, and it took me a nice little 2-hour nap this afternoon, and just kind of the first week of school was it was productive. It was just, and Kasey can attest to this, when you're on a 4-day week, of course we're on 8.5. I mean, by the time our day's done, we're on a 9-hour day. And so it takes your body a while just to get reacclimated to it. And to make things more fun, I'm driving bus now in the morning, which I'm trying to get out of. And, and at our school right now, the Great Resignation also applies to bus drivers. And so, so it is what it is. But no, if you saw tonight's title is called We Can't. Oh, by the way, gentlemen, season 2, we are now on episode 25. Episode 25 already, getting close to the halfway mark of year 2.
That's crazy.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, that means we are just under 25 episodes to be at episode 100. Get in there?
Yes.
Pretty close.
That is correct. That is correct. So, but yeah, so this kind of we had Kasey on last time when we talked about the Great Resignation, and so tonight we called it We Can't Fail. And this was in response to the boys and I bounce ideas off of each other all week long. We talk about, we share topics and we just bounce stuff off of each other all week long. And I shared an article that, and like I said, we try to get from various sources, and, every now and then, once in a blue moon, we will look at one from our friends at good old Fox News. But it was actually an interesting article that they had posted on. Fox had this cross country, I guess you want to call it it was on their digital side, but it was it was an online forum on educators and the best forms of grading in a series. And a lot of the things that they were talking about, there was, when you look at grading, there are varieties, and Kasey's going to share with us some of the things that she does. But there, and we'll talk about the poll here in a little bit too, but we do, there's the traditional A through F grading scale, okay, 100-point scale with 9 to 10-point ranges that exist for each level. You have what's called comparative or relative grading, and this is more on college settings. I actually had classes like this where, and I guess you could kind of, this to me, it kind of sounds like you're grading on the curve almost, but relative grading is determining student grades by comparing them against those of their peers. You have what's called, and this is one that Kasey's going to talk about, standards-based grading, which is based on students showing signs of mastery or understanding various skills. And then we have the one that is the more, I don't know if I want to call it parent popular one, but the no zero grading policy, and it bans teachers. And Missouri isn't one of these, thankfully, but there are some schools within Missouri, our neighbors to the south of us, a school district to the south of us, I won't mention by name, but has a no zero grading policy, which bans teachers from giving students grade below 50%. And the argument behind this say that giving students too many zeros can make it near impossible for them to pass. And this is a system that is catching a lot of fire and is bringing up a lot of controversy around the way. And let's just start from the top of it. Overall, all of us were pretty much raised on the AF scale. I would assume you guys are all. I've had each one of you guys in class. I mean, traditionally that's what has been going on in the past. Right off the top. Well, let's go with what we'll get. I don't want Kasey to get her. I want to talk about, how do you explain to us, Kasey, a little bit about standards-based grading, and then kind of walk us through that.
So standards-based grading is on a 4-point scale, basically where you've got advanced, you have exceeded the expectations of what is required for you basically at your grade level. Proficient being you are where you're supposed to be. Basic, where you have the skills, you just need more practice with it in order to achieve that proficiency. And then below basic, where you're not at all where you should be. You're not even close. And I do standards-based grading in my classroom, but when you look at it, it's more of a hybrid of it, because we do live in a world where everything is on the A to F scale. So I have to find a way to basically take that 4-point scale and convert it over to that way. Because even in like the program that we use for our grading you can't do true standards based that way. But I originally started doing this when I first started teaching in my English 2 course, which for everybody that is a teacher knows that English 2 is one of the state mandated tests. Like I have standardized testing. And so I originally started it because the school that I previously taught at, standardized testing was like the end all be all. And so I wanted to find a way to make sure that my students were achieving what they needed to achieve before they took this high stakes test. And standard-based grading kind of helped me as a new teacher kind of lay out where I needed to be, where my kids needed to be before they took this test. And then I just brought it into all of my other classes because it helped me help them actually become more accountable for their grades, because in standards-based grading, they can kind of also see where they are on certain skills as far as like analyses of certain things. So whether it's over a thematic analysis or characterization, just helping them kind of really expand on different critical thinking levels when it comes to like analyzing and reading between the lines, which anybody that's in a classroom now know that kids tend to struggle with something that's not blatantly stated. They don't really know how to read between the lines as well as maybe they could. So go ahead.
So you're doing, so more of it is just like, okay, I have a list of, or I have a group of abilities that I want you to be able to master before the conclusion of the semester. Mm-hmm. And it's stuff that you can revisit over the course of different lessons.
Yes.
Then? Yeah.
Yeah. So like when I look at the English standards, the Missouri learning standards for English, English has so many of them because they literally take they basically have fiction, nonfiction, writing, and then speaking and listening. So whatever the standard is for literature or any of the fiction that we teach, they have the exact same standards for any nonfiction texts. They're just like they're worded a little differently to match the type of text that you're reading. And then you have writing, and then there's like 3 major standards for writing, and then you have speaking and listening. So what I do is I look at, so for my sophomores, each of the key standards, and I'm like, okay, this one is explicitly talking about connotation and figurative language. So they need to master the ability to not just, I mean, it also involves looking at like the DOK or the depth of knowledge levels of each standard, because it's no longer just identifying a simile. It's understanding what's being compared, why it's being compared, and kind of the author's purpose behind it. So it's part of that. When we had that one PD last year where we had to like deconstruct certain standards. You kind of like that, to the point that like, you know what the standard is asking, because, you know, the politicians in Jeff City have riddled our standards so full of fluff that you kind of have to figure out what is it that they're wanting the kids to learn. And so I strip it down to like the base. What is the skill that they're supposed to master here sophomore year before they go to junior year? And then that's how I code all of my tests that way. So honestly, like if you were to open my gradebook, it's also all data, because that's, the state loves data. And so when it comes to these tested courses, I have that data, but then it also does help the students like succeed, whether that is bringing them from below basic to basic or basic to proficient, just helping them grow. In a perfect world, I would get them all to at least proficient, but in the grand scheme of things, that's not going to happen. And really, standards-based grading is just to help the kids get from where they were to at least the next step. And so
I think it's a good point to mention too, that this, within this style of learning, and this is something that with this style of grading can apply across the different curriculum, because in the end, what we're measuring is critical thinking skills, and being critical thinking skills and application. Whereas, you know, part of this argument, and you guys, this is kind of where we can get in, you know, there's a lot of different ways that you can view this. We can say, all right, we want the students to succeed. Okay. So to what degree or how can we promote student success? Standards-based education, by what Kasey is saying here, is we're teaching them to be successful by developing, you know, from more than just rote memorization to a point of taking information that they have, analyzing that information, maybe even putting that in, you know, twisting that information, putting it into a different format and saying, okay, now apply this information, take the knowledge that you have and apply it in a new kind of envelope. Yes. And Travis, you have a question there.
Yeah, I want to kind of go off what you guys are saying right now and go back to what Kasey said. You made a point how you said lawmakers tend to put a lot of fluff and like the expectations that they have for you guys and what they want the students to learn. And I think the last episode he touched on this too. He said there was just so much, like the list was just giant of all the things you guys had to touch on and you had to get the students proficient in. I guess what I want to ask you guys, and this is for you too, Andy, do you think that if there was I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but if there was changes that were made and I don't want to say dumb down the criteria, but like we still want obviously a high standard of learning, but if they made the criteria for teachers to students like simpler and more to the point and more direct, do you think that would, I'm sure obviously one, it would help you guys, but do you think if it was less fluff and more to the point on the criteria, that would help students? Do you think that's one of the issues that maybe we're seeing in education? Do you understand my question?
Yeah. Go ahead,
I get what you're
Kasey.
saying. I think yes and no. Like for English, we've got like 30 plus standards that we have to cover in 180 days. That's not realistic. And then they've recently come out and said, all right, now out of all of these standards, they've started to do that. And I I use air quotes as like
Yeah.
some of the core subjects, they have these target standards where it's like, these are the standards that are actually the important ones. So you need to make sure that you're teaching these. So like when we had this PD over that, I had a hard time wrapping my mind around it. I was like, if we're doing just these targeted standards, then why do we have all of these other
All this other stuff
that I still have to cover? Well, the funny thing is, like, I can't remember which core subject it is, but they only have like 12 targeted standards or something, like something ridiculously low, as opposed to English, where it's still over half of our standards that we have to like cover within a year. And so I think they were at the basis of that line of thing, and they were trying to like narrow it down for teachers. But in the end, like, there's so much wrong with like trying to quantify a qualitative thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Like there's a lot of things I have wrong with it, but I just don't know how they would go about. I don't have any personal ideas on like how to fix that. But I get what you're saying. Like, how can they make it easier for teachers while also promoting like student success and getting them to where they need to be?
Yeah.
Our coworker Amanda Henderson, thank you for joining us tonight, Amanda. Saying priority standards are what you're in reference to.
Yes, that's the word, priority standards.
Yes, thank you, Amanda.
And it's just like English has an obscene amount of priority standards, and I'm just like, we're basically doing all the standards.
Well, and for
minus like 2.
and I'll go a step further with this. In history, and well, the one thing that they look at for our government is pretty precise. Government is very precise in their standards that they want us to cover. Like when our kids go into the test in May, I know that I've got to cover this, I have to cover this, and I have to cover this. And it's to talk about this stuff. It's easier for me to teach government and prepare them for a test because government's one of those things that you have to take from the theory and then apply that to real world settings. And so you're doing that on the fly anyway, so kids can get that aha moment. Oh, okay, so this is why this is this and this and this.
Can I jump in really quick?
Sure.
From a student's perspective and what you just talked about, I remember specifically like you preparing us for like government standardized tests as opposed to like, say, English, like what Kasey teaches. And I can say, and maybe it's because, like you said, it's more direct. Like this is what you need. I can say from a student perspective, it made it much easier as a learner.
Well,
because it was.
And here's the thing, so in U.S. history now. Let me flip. And in U.S. history, it's been about 4 or 5 years now. They've made the U.S. history. If we want to give an end of a course exam, it's purely voluntary. It used to be mandatory, but now it's voluntary. And the State Department of Education, Department of Education, Secondary Education, realized that it was impossible to have a certain set. They have their standards. They have a set of standards, but to adequately test those standards is, to me, it's almost impossible, because what I am to cover, technically by whatever the government, by what our state, when you look at it, in reality, I am to cover from 1865, ideally up until 9/11. Okay. And so that is you're talking about a mile wide and an inch deep. And to me, when we took those tests, by the time we took those tests in April, and I was just getting to the end of World War II, getting ready to get into the Cold War, and they're asking question about the Japanese economic revival after World War II and all that. And then, asking about the Rust Belt, which, that idea, that concept didn't come around until the late 70s, early 80s. And our tests were always in the toilet and it was a state, and it wasn't just us, it was a statewide thing. And we'd go to these departmental education meetings in our conference, and the history teacher would sit around like, okay, how are you guys doing this? We're all saying the same thing. How are you doing this? We run through it. And to me, I think that gives a great disservice to the course matter. Now you can, but then the flip side of that is teaching these concepts. The way you look at it is, within history, it's a lot of cause and effect, and how that same theme seems to repeat itself again. And so with history, it's hard. The standard base that Kasey's mentioning, we can do it. We can do it, but I don't want to say it's more difficult. It's difficult for every core subject. So, Sean, you had what's your question?
Yeah, so you actually answered it while I was after I rose my hand, because I was asking, I was going to ask what's the cutoff for American history. So like how far they have you teach, because if you think about it, we're a pretty young nation, and you said up to about 2001 is kind of where they stop. And if you think about it, that's a gap of about 20 years. And if you think about our nation's history, we were founded as a nation in 1776, declared our independence at least. And so if you think about it, that's about 250 years. You take 20 years of that out where it's not being taught. I was just doing the math, that's 12% of our nation's history, almost a little over a tenth that do they teach, or that was what I was wondering is in the books, or in 2 years from now, are you going to have to be teaching about January 6th or these other things that are considered big events now? What's the
and I want to broaden this back out to even to English with Kasey too. And this is my course. Kasey, you're 10 years in, right? You're 10 years in?
I'm 8 years.
8 years in.
Don't put me at that 10-year mark yet.
Yeah, I know. So to me, and the 20, and Amanda, if you're still online, I want you to ring in on this too on our chat line here. But to me, the generalized feeling that I get over the course, and I know Amanda's taught over 10 years. She's taught at least 10 years at Clopton. But to me, the overall feel that from the time that I had you guys in class, to today, I believe that kids are losing, and you can attribute it to whatever you want to. Home situation, you can attribute it to access of smart technology, everything else. But kids are losing a lot of the ability to analyze, process, and just the basic use. And again, I don't want to make our kids sound like they're ignorant vegetables or something, but just to process common sense and how to use the information that you have, instead of those. I mean, it's so much more easier to them just to say, okay, I'm going to go to my phone and I'm going to access via my phone, or I don't need to know that, or when am I ever going to? And the prevailing attitude is, which has probably started even with my generation, when am I ever going to use this in life? And so what they do is, there's a guy I follow on TikTok. And this guy, he's I don't know if he's a history major or what he is. We've used his stuff on the show before, where he goes out and he just asks common questions. I think I know you're referring to, and we've used this guy before, but he's like, he'll go out and he'll ask, what document was signed in 1776? Who did we declare our independence? And just stuff like that. Or if you were to ask somebody, okay, what's the difference between a simile and a metaphor? Crickets. Okay.
Unless they've just graduated high school, I think you're right.
Well, when am I ever going to? We have a student that we all love at our school, but he just well, I'm never going to use that. And and we love our guys, but to me it's harder. It's a lot harder, I believe, in rural districts because, and there's nothing wrong with this. Kids going into farming, going into tech-based industries, and everything.
We need those kind of,
and we
need those kind of workers,
right? And we need that. But at the same time, to be someone who is going to be, and this is one of the things on our survey. I'll bring up our survey thing here in a moment, but one of the things that we say we measure success is, are you a contributing member of society? How do you contribute to society? And if you don't have the basic working skills of how to critically think and apply knowledge to a situation and to see the situation as a whole, yeah, you may be paying your tax, but I mean, are you part of the problem or are you part of the solution? I guess is what I'm going to say. Sean, did you have a follow-up there?
I did. A couple different small things. Real quick, does the school require? Do they require? Not do they offer, but do they require personal finance for high school students? Is it a requirement?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. So, Travis, this is a question for you, and then I'll get to where I'm coming back from. What things in school that the classes that you took would you say? What are the top 3 that you actually use in application today, and what are the bottom 3 that you're like, I have not fucking touched that in since the day I left? It doesn't have to be 3 specifically, just general.
Yeah, I couldn't think of 3 to be honest with you. One specifically, I mean, I understand why it's taught, but like biology and things like that, I haven't really used other than like, if you want to throw it in the category of biology, like first aid and basic stuff like that I learned in the military and even working in construction, I guess you could throw that under there, but not really anything biology wise. What's another good class? I would say one I picked up on, I would say personal finance. However, I remember at the time it just didn't click. Like a lot of the curriculum and stuff just did not register with me until years later, unfortunately.
Well, and part of the issue with that curriculum, and this is, the curriculum was not taught by a teacher. The curriculum was a DVD follow along for, and to put it in perspective, it was a Dave Ramsey course, and application of Dave Ramsey is perfect in theory, not perfect in execution.
I would agree.
So that's
think maybe that's why it didn't really hit home with me. Mm-hmm. Man, I want to say one of the stuff, and I'm a fan of history and I love it and I love learning about it. So I think that obviously stuck with me just because it's something that's always clicked with me and something I've enjoyed. But I guess everyday use.
Sarah,
English skills definitely were helped. I mean,
just to mention,
helped me with a lot of things.
Just to mention, Sarah Rutherford said in our group chat, mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
Sarah.
God. Yes, there it is.
So part of the reason why I asked that question was for the VA. Out here, they have a bunch of great work placement programs for veterans. And I'm going through one of them right now, which helps me with my VA disability benefit, but also it helps in assistance with job placement and job training for veterans. So one of the things where my expertise comes in is project management and management background. So that's what I've done for the last handful of years is management. And I had to take an assessment to kind of place, like to see where my placement was for management. And the 3 things that I took a test over were mathematics, reading comprehension, and writing comprehension. And the thing was, like, running an actual business, I have never fucking need the Pythagorean theorem. I never needed it then. I still don't need it now. All of the reading and comprehension stuff, knocked out the park. We were in a really unique situation. We were a class, like my grade, for those that don't know, Travis and I were in the same class. I compare us to, it was like being at Hogwarts, because our English teacher was our Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, because it was a new one every single year. So
oh no, I hope I'm not
That's
the
such a good point. Oh my God, yeah.
yeah.
So
and
you had was Miss Henderson your was that your was
no, so she technically was never our English teacher. I had her for speech and drama, but not actual English. We had 4 different teachers throughout English. But so I used that. And my thing with mathematics is where we're at in society. I just wanted, you guys are teachers, so I'd love to get your thoughts. Travis, I'd like to get your thoughts on this too. Do you think, with just kind of how the world is and where people tend to put their focus, like people are being more vocal about the things that are being taught in schools? I feel like, even though it's hard to keep teachers and students are progressively just getting worse and worse, do you think that maybe a more practical use of time for when it comes to mathematics would be maybe the first 2 years, or even the later 2 years, an emphasis on your algebra and your geometry, but then in your either later years or early, again, you focus more on your financial mathematics. That becomes like an actual mathematics class, is finance, and even like formulas. So like there is, at least when I was in school, I'm sure there still is, Excel was like a course you could take if you wanted, and it was a semester long. But I think that those kind of practical applications or understanding of some of those more formula-based mathematics that we don't emphasize, at least in school, like we teach them, sure, but it might be a chapter in the book, which is, I think that personal finance, instead of being like an elective class, I believe that personal finance should be more like a mathematics style class. And again, there has to be final on, the idea of balancing a checkbook, at least for people our age, is not like the most common thing, because we have mobile apps and we can check when a dime comes out, we can check it right there.
Right.
But practical use of truly understanding, not just like a quick week breeze through or a quick, hey, this, the interest rates, your student loans are going to fuck you up, but like a legitimate deep dive into, hey, if you're planning on going into the tech field, cool. We're going to do a simulated thing, and it's going to be a whole semester on like, this is what your life looks like in bills, from your tools to your insurance to your dues, like all the different things. And then vice versa, where it's like, cool, we're also going to do that for if you're a college student or if you're a home buyer. So that way you spend a legitimate semester or even a year truly understanding, hey, when I'm looking at colleges, for some students, they're like, who gives $20,000 is nothing a year, because I'm going to be fucking rolling in it in a couple of years. That was my first initial thought, was like, college is 18 grand a year. I don't give a shit. Like I'll be making that the week I'm out, which we all know that's not the case.
One of the things there, along with it too, Sean, Sarah chimed in and said, not to mention in business, there's so much software that will do this math for you. You kind of said this, but will do this math for you a million different ways quickly and can guarantee that it's correct as well. So,
which is true. But I'm talking in like practical application for
just using everyday life.
Your day-to-day, like, because
because
I don't know, and people can disagree, and that's fine, but I'm a firm believer that personal finance management is more applicable for today's youth and should be more applicable than calculus, unless that motherfucker wants to do calculus. Like, if they want to do those things, yes. Like we know, like engineers don't fucking drop. You don't wake up at 22, go, I've been beaten off my whole life, I'm going to be an engineer. It doesn't happen then. It happens earlier. And so I feel like we already, in my opinion, we already put a lot on the shoulders of high school students saying, hey, what do you want to take? Because what you take in high school is going to affect, what you do for the rest of your life whether or not you go to college or don't go to college. So I know it doesn't make it easier on the staff like you guys, because you guys are already stretched thin. Again, from the people that I've talked to, from the conversations we had, I know Travis can vouch for me for this as well. When we were in school, and Kasey, you might feel the same way. When we were in school, did the school not make it feel like if you went to Votech, you were lesser, your high school diploma would be lesser than that of a person that had a college prep diploma?
I was actually going to say something along the lines of like, and we were kind of talking about this earlier, like my family and I, because I told them I was doing this tonight, that there's so much pressure on going to college. Like that is the end all be all of whether or not you're successful. And I'm a teacher. You would think I'd be like, yes, go to college. No, there are people who have not gone to college. They either did vocational school or just like went into a trade, and they're making way more money than I am. Way more money. So I agree. I think there's like, the college path is not for everyone, but we put so much pressure on it that kids feel like they have to do this. And so they're taking those classes that they probably shouldn't be in.
Exactly. And I think that's a great, oh, sorry, Andy, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of our other listeners, who's a friend of mine, said realistic budget would have been a hell of a lot more helpful to focus on than calculus or learning about taxes and how to apply for jobs and do interviews than how to dissect a worm. And I want to kind of go back to something you alluded to before, Sean, in making connections within curriculum. Okay. So, and I mentioned Amanda earlier. She's my, and Kasey can back me up on this. We have and I don't want to embarrass her, but Amanda Henderson is a very valuable asset to our school district. She's actually currently working on her doctorate. She knows a lot about data and stats and how this is a person who can really plug things in. And so she's been there for 10 years, and she has made me into a different teacher. And we approached each other about, one year we were talking about reading scores, and I said, I'm going to do a book in my class. And that book is The Jungle. If you haven't read The Jungle, it's a book by Upton Sinclair. It talks about the meatpacking industry in Chicago at the turn of the century, the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. And it opened up a lot of things. And so she could assign that book, and then we could assign that book, and then by the concepts that I talk about in U.S. history, okay, look, here's what government regulation, lack of, doesn't do, and here's what it would look like, and you make those connections between the book, and you're allowed, and so that kind of promotes critical thinking. Okay, so this thing that V's talking about in U.S. history today, okay, I can apply that, because a lot of, like I said, I go back to what I said earlier, we lack a lot of basic critical thinking skills, because, when we talk about government stuff, well, how can they do that? Well, let's go back and let's talk about the stuff that we've, and it falls short on people because, number one falsehood that I have to always put up with. Well, why even vote? Because my vote doesn't count. Technically, yes, it does, because they have this misconstrued idea of how, like, the Electoral College works, just for an example. Okay. And so having a basic understanding and saying, so there is a place, I believe, for every subject. Now, like you said, Sean, Pythagorean theorem, unless you're going to go out there and, build whatever for a living, you don't need to know that A squared plus B squared equals C squared and all. But for something that is, and I'll agree with Shelby on her comment too, we have to get back to teaching some basic level of skills. Yes, we need to know the higher levels of thinking. I'm not discrediting that at all. But at the same time, I think sometimes we're sending these kids out into the world not being prepared. And, that's why I look at the standard-based thing, and we kind of got, which is fine. We've talked a lot about this, but I want to go a step further. And this whole So another one of these methods that were used that they talked about was the zero fail. Okay, no zero. Like there's a number of school districts who are going into this non-zero, non-failing thing. Okay, so you have, I think on one end of the spectrum you have A to F, and then not too far off from that you have what Kasey was talking about standards based stuff like that. And then you go to the other end of this where you say, okay, what are you wanting to accomplish when you say we're not going to allow no zeros, okay? Because you say, well, if they get so many zeros, then it's going to promote that they can't graduate or they can't pass the class. And I tend to disagree with that, because part of that kind of grading, when I say okay, and we had a discussion, Kasey and Amanda and I had a discussion Friday afternoon after school, and we were talking about to these kids, part of doing and learning and applying yourself is actually doing the stuff. If you don't do the stuff, you say, okay, oh, well, little Johnny didn't have his time to do his work because he was working his 30-hour, and we do have kids who are working 30 and 40 hours a week outside of school, who are going, I can tell you one student I'm thinking of in particular right now who goes out and works and he actually goes to tech, and he works a 3 to 11 shift out in the community. And so he's putting in 40 hours a week on top of going to school. And by the time little Johnny gets home from, his 8-hour work shift, the last thing that he wants to do is apply himself to homework. And so what we end up having then is a kid who's making money, but he's not passing class. And so now they're looking at doing stuff like, okay, I'm going to do Missouri Options, which is a good program, and it allows me to, but okay, so my question then becomes, what are we trying to promote? Okay. We want to, and I agree with standards-based education, because I believe that we want you to get this concept this way. All right. And like in my field, I grade that on A through F. Kasey does it a different way, both of which have its perks and benefits and sometimes drawbacks. But just to go to the far end of the spectrum and say, okay, nobody's going to fail. Everybody gets a ribbon. Everybody gets an A. And I know this for a fact with Kasey, that if you turn in a project and it doesn't meet her standards, she may give it back to you. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Kasey, but she's going to give it back to you and say, hey, you're missing this. Or I'll do that with my kids, like on a paper. I'm like, hey, why don't you include a little bit more on this? I don't think this is your best particular effort, but if they just say, I've already wrote it, so screw that, and that's kind of what we have to deal with. Some of it, I've always said this, and I get met with sometimes brisk opposition, not from a lot of people that I know, but some of it has to be put back. We have to start putting responsibility back on teacher or back on parents and back on kids to say, okay, if you want your kids to learn, then back us up.
Well, you and I were kind of talking about this before we started the episode, and how with standards-based grading, technically it has that like no zero policy, but I said I kind of do like a hybrid of standards-based, where if you're not in my class, you're not getting the 50%. You're not getting the knowledge. Because to me, the 50% is you got the knowledge. I was able to, whether it was giving you notes, you were in class for the reading and class discussions or whatever, you got 50%. The other 50% is you demonstrating that knowledge to me in some way. But I mean, if you're not there, 0. If you cheat, obviously a 0, because that's not your own work. But with standards-based, I also told you, like, the punishment in my class for not doing your work is doing your work. You're going to do it, or you're going to take the F on the assignment or the test or whatever. And I told my students this last week. I was like, the way I do things, it makes you accountable for how successful you are in my class, because they have the opportunity to redo anything for a better grade, because what I want is the mastery of a skill. So the way I run standards-based is it makes parents and kids more accountable and more invested in their learning. So they're achieving some sort of goal that they've set for themselves. And I mean, a lot of parents tend to love that. I do get a lot of flack for, oh, you let my kid redo your work. Like they shouldn't get that second opportunity, which I'm always shocked when a parent says that to me. But I'm kind of like, you get to redo a driving test. If you bomb the ACT, you get to take it again. If you don't do something right for your job, you still have to do it and redo it if it's wrong. Mm-hmm. And so I tell them, I'm like, I'm going to let them redo it because I want them to do it right, whether it takes them once or 10 times. And so I think that philosophy helps like make the kids more accountable for what they turn in. Or like when I give them feedback and I'm like, this is where you went wrong. Hopefully on future projects, they internalize that feedback and just learn from that mistake.
And I think as teaching evolves, and this is what I go back to saying, because I as a veteran teacher, I draw a lot from my younger coworkers because they have a lot. I was when I first started teaching, I was a very much hunt, seek the answers, and turn it in. That's it. Now I've become a lot of, I don't know if I want to use the word Socratic in my teaching, but I ask a lot more of why do you think this happened? And my goal this year has been, and one of the things that I ask just about every concept that we talk about, what are you prepared to do about it? Even if it's something as simple as mastery of a skill, what are you prepared to do? Are you prepared? Do you want to master something? I mean, it's like, and it doesn't matter what field you go into. Do you want to strive for excellence? Or do you just want to be mediocre and just, oh, I passed it? The old saying, oh, D's get degrees. I hate that. I hate the idea of saying D's get degrees and a lot of kids think, well, that's just in school. That doesn't carry over into real life.
Oh, it absolutely does.
It's the attitude.
It's the attitude that you have, your work attitude, and just
bare minimum.
I look at the two guys, and I'm not just doing this because I'm bragging on my co-host, but I look at the two guys that I have on this show with me. I know that Sean hasn't got to the place where he's at in life by doing the bare minimum. Sean has gone above and beyond. He's doing what he can, and he's moved to Los Angeles. He's chasing his dreams. He's putting in the hard hours. He's paying his dues. Travis is doing the exact same thing. And say, I'm not satisfied with just this. I want more. I need to do better. I need to accomplish more and make the best thing out of myself. When I asked in the survey, so the survey this week asked this, and I want to get your guys' feedback on this. And I said, what do you feel is the greatest measure of a student's success? And as always, I allowed it to where, by the way, this was out of all the polls that we've done, we've been doing the polls for quite a while, this was the most responded to poll that we've had. So the ones that I gave were letter grades, standardized test scores, class rank, college placement tests, and job achievement. And then we had 3 added on ones that said positively contributing to society, individual goals, and GPA. Okay. Our number one answer by far was job achievement. Okay. Let that sink in just for a second. That goes along with what I was just saying. Job achievement. What measures your success as a good student is what you do. It's a direct correlation to how you were in school. Our job is I think one of our core jobs as educators is to present, not just be satisfied with getting the A on the test. I want to know why I know what I know. And that shouldn't, and then, 5 minutes later I forget about it. That's not learning. That's not, okay, I need to remember this. I need to know about, if I'm even in casual conversation, I used with a kid one time. I said, well, that's kind of the wrong use. You're using that metaphor in the wrong way. And they look at me cross-eyed like, what, metaphor? What's that? What's a metaphor? Or what, when you,
Like, I think you're using that word wrong. I don't think you know what it means.
yes, and to the thing of how I measure success in a student. To me, it is how productive they. Like I said, I never vote on the surveys because I don't want to skew the numbers. But to me, the two things is how you contribute in society and how successful you are in what you do in your job achievement. If I look at someone, and that even goes if it's stay at home mom, how that stay at home mom does her business at home, how she maintain, I'm budgeting for my groceries. I do this, I have the, and they've got it all online. Or how if somebody is just as something as, a factory line worker. Okay, am I just going in there and I put in, my hour and then I go find a closet to duck into so I can draw my check later on? What are you doing to be this is a phrase that teachers use a lot, making you to be the best version of yourself that you can possibly be. We got caught up in the 90s comparing ourselves, and this is kind of where these trends started. In the 80s, it was A through F. You go through your classes, and then you went on. Okay? Then long about the 90s, we got to this point of where we were saying, here's where we rank amongst the industrialized countries of the world. Man, we're in last place in this, and this. And so then you get, we talked about fluff that the state puts in. What you get in some of these things is you get a grad student from Mizzou or a grad student from one of these colleges who come over and they work for the legislators or they work in DESE and hey, I've got this idea for a master thesis. Let's try to plug this into a, real life situation in DESE. And then that becomes practice and principle and policy, and it drives me nuts. So long point short, I believe that our primary goal to measure a student's success needs to be how to make them a better version of themselves and how to make the best of their life experience.
I agree. I think with like the people that are in charge of our education, like the ones that you see that run DESE, a lot of them are so data driven that they think they can put a quantity on something that's qualitative, like with standardized testing. First of all, English, my subject that I teach, is not a black and white subject.
No.
It's a very subjective thing. Like the theme that you get out of a book is not going to be the same theme that I get out of a book. How can you make that a multiple choice test? And
Right.
That's what the EOC is. And so if you don't put what they want you to put, then you fail the test. And so I agree. I think we need to find a better way to measure any form of learning, but how can you put a number or a letter grade or anything on something that's more qualitative? Job achievement.
Right.
What do they do with it? Where do they go once they have left my room?
Nothing makes me happier. When I see we added new staff this year who were former Clopton grads who now and of course when I go to my physical therapist or I see Clopton grads working as trainers, and I see graduates who are working in the service industry who I've had do welding for me. I see these, and they're putting life skills to practice, and they're learning how to start a small business, and they're running their own thing, and they're taking practical knowledge and they're using it. And part of that is, again, comes back to the attitude that's in the home. You know, if and I'll say this to the parents who are listening tonight, if you are questioning, man, why are you guys having to study this crap? This is about, you know, one of the things that I'm right. For example, my daughter's working on the scientific theory right now in science. We did a worksheet over the scientific theory, and you know, the whole thing behind scientific theory is critical thinking. And I'm trying to explain this to my daughter in such a way because she was like, I don't even know why we need this. And I said, well, here's why. And it's like it's those kind of conversations that start in the home. If you really want to help your educators out, you want to really help out your kids' education. You know, I mean, the simple answer you can have is, well, honey, you may not use this exact thing in life later on, but there are things that you can gain from this that will help you apply it to different situations in life.
I'm always telling my students, 10 years from now, I do not care if you know the plot of The Great Gatsby. What I do care is that you know the skills that I taught you during that unit. The critical thinking, or even something as simple as using context clues to figure out what is being said. Because, and it kind of goes back to with how kids today can just, I'm going to Google it on my phone. I'm going to look up the word. Okay, well, over the summer, my internet crashed like 4 times. If I didn't have the internet and I couldn't look up a word, I guess I'm going to have to figure it out on my own. And so just basic problem solving and critical thinking skills is what I want them to get when we read difficult literature that's 100 years old.
Yep. Well, we appreciate Kasey coming on tonight, and this is exactly the way I wanted the discussion to go tonight. But we love having Kasey on. She's quickly becoming another one of our new favorites to have on the show.
I love coming on.
So.
We love having guests, so it's awesome to have people on.
And we'll have some details that we're going to discuss with Sean. Travis and I kind of talked about some ideas. We've got some interesting ideas coming up in the future weeks. But great show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Sean?
Coming on.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for joining us, Kasey. It's always great to get your input, especially someone that is in the trenches, as they say. The same thing with you, Lee. It's always nice to kind of get the insight of people that are kind of there, boots on ground. So again, to our listeners, thank you all so much. Again, continue to be a friend, tell a friend. I was just talking to my better half here a little bit ago about some of the growth that we've been doing as a podcast. And again, we couldn't do it without you guys. The interactions that we have on the polls, the interaction that we have throughout the week of people that pick it up on YouTube or Spotify or wherever it is you guys listen to your podcast. The numbers continue to grow, and we do appreciate that. And just with that, we can bring you guys the best content possible as we look towards actually landing a couple of sponsors, as we kind of clean up our production and give you guys the best that we've got. We just couldn't do it without you. And we appreciate your feedback. And we appreciate each and every single one of you guys individually that continues to listen. It's always nice hearing from someone that I know that's like, yeah, man, I spent 4 hours in the car just listening to a couple of your guys' episodes. Blows my mind that, but it's a reality that we actually get to enjoy and live in. So from the bottom of our hearts, thank you all so much. Again, be a friend, tell a friend, let them know about the show. Even if they just give it a quick listen for a second, it might just be what they needed to hear. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your week. Enjoy your Labor Day festivities. Be safe, be smart. Can't wait to talk to you guys next week.
We'll see you then.